I'm Celeste, 35, and I never imagined my own brother would betray me like this. For 3 years, I sacrificed everything to help Mark's family after he lost his business. I paid their mortgage covered medical bills and ensured my niece and nephews could stay in their private school. Then one evening, I overheard him telling his son not to be a loser like Aunt Celeste. Those words shattered everything. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. Have you ever been betrayed by family? You went out of your way to help. I read all comments and would love to hear your stories. Growing up in our middle class neighborhood in Chicago, Mark and I shared the kind of close bond that many siblings with a small age gap develop. Even though he was 2 years younger than me, we were inseparable as children. We built blanket forts in the living room, rode our bikes to the corner store for popsicles in summer, and stood up for each other when neighborhood kids tried to cause trouble. Our childhood home was modest but comfortable. My parents both worked hard to provide for us. My father as an insurance adjuster, and my mother as a high school English teacher. They emphasized the importance of education and hard work, though as we grew older, I began to notice differences in how they treated us. Mark was naturally charismatic and athletic. By middle school, he had already become popular, excelling in football and basketball. I still remember how my father's face would light up at his games, his voice rising above the crowd as he cheered. My mother would proudly tell her colleagues about Mark's touchdowns and game-winning shots. I took a different path. Quiet and studious, I found my place in books and academics. I joined the debate team and the math club, staying up late to perfect essays and study for tests. My report cards were filled with A's, and I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class. "Your grades are expected, Celeste," my father would say when I showed him my report card. "You've always been smart." There was no special celebration for my academic achievements, no loud cheering from the stands when I won the state debate championship. My accomplishments were acknowledged with quiet nods and brief congratulations before the conversation inevitably turned to Mark's latest game. I never resented Mark for the extra attention he received. He was a good brother who stood up for me when others made fun of my bookish nature. We had different strengths, and I understood that his were simply more visible, more exciting to watch unfold. I took pride in my own quiet achievements and found validation in my teachers' praise and college acceptance letters. When I was accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, my parents were proud, but it was tempered with concern about the cost. When Mark was recruited for college football at a smaller state school, they threw a massive party and invited the entire neighborhood. The contrast wasn't lost on me, but I accepted it as the natural order of our family. College further separated our paths. I double majored in business and computer science, spending weekends in the library while my peers attended parties. Mark enjoyed the full college experience, social events, fraternity life, and sports with academics taking a back seat. He dropped out after 2 years to try his hand at various business ventures, convinced he could make it big without a degree. Our lives changed forever when I was 25 and Mark was 23. Our parents were driving home from a weekend getaway when a drunk driver crossed the center line on a rainy night. The call came at 2 a.m., both killed instantly in the head-on collision. The next few weeks passed in a blur of grief and responsibility. As the older sibling with the practical head, I took on the burden of funeral arrangements, navigating insurance policies, and settling our parents' estate. Mark was devastated in a way that rendered him almost non-functional. He would spend days in bed, emerging only for the funeral and necessary paperwork signings. "I can't do this, Celeste," he told me, his voice breaking as we sat at our parents' kitchen table surrounded by documents. "I just can't think about any of this right now." So I handled it all. I postponed my plans for graduate school, took a leave of absence for my entry-level marketing job, and spent weeks sorting through the emotional and logistical aftermath of sudden loss. I made sure Mark ate, checked that he was taking care of himself, and carried both our grief on my shoulders. Our parents had modest life insurance policies and had built some equity in their home. After all debts were paid, we each received about $90,000. Not a fortune, but enough to provide a foundation for our futures. Mark saw the inheritance as an opportunity. 6 months after our parents' death, his grief seemed to transform into determination. "I'm going to make something of myself, Celeste," he declared. "Dad always believed in me, and I'm going to prove him right." He used his portion of the inheritance to start a real estate business, focusing on residential properties in up and coming Chicago neighborhoods. His natural charm and networking abilities served him well, and within a couple of years, he was projecting an image of remarkable success. I took a different approach with my inheritance. Still grieving and processing the sudden responsibility thrust upon me, I chose stability over opportunity. I put most of the money into savings and focused on building my career as a project manager at a tech company. The job wasn't particularly exciting, but it offered good benefits and steady advancement. I told myself that one day when I felt more secure, I would pursue my dreams of starting my own business or returning for that graduate degree. During this time, Mark met Jessica, a beautiful marketing executive with a sharp mind and expensive tastes. They married quickly in a lavish ceremony that must have cost most of his early business profits. I stood beside Jessica as a bridesmaid, genuinely happy for my brother, who seemed to have found both professional success and personal fulfillment. Within a few years, Mark and Jessica had 3 children, Tyler, Emma, and Zach. From the outside, they were the picture-perfect family. Mark drove a luxury SUV, Jessica dressed in designer clothes, and their children attended an exclusive private school. Their social media feeds were filled with vacation photos from Aspen, and the Bahamas family portraits in coordinated outfits and snapshots of their beautiful 5-bedroom home in one of Chicago's most desirable suburbs. I loved being Aunt Celeste to my niece and nephews. Though my modest 1-bedroom apartment couldn't accommodate the kind of elaborate entertainment their home offered, I would take them to museums, science centers, and parks whenever I had the chance. Tyler was bright and athletic like his father, but with a sensitive streak that Mark sometimes seemed to discourage. Emma was creative and independent with a wisdom beyond her years. Zach, the youngest, was everyone's darling, with his boundless energy and infectious laugh. Behind the carefully cultivated image of success, I occasionally caught glimpses of tension. Jessica's spending habits seemed to exceed even Mark's growing business, and sometimes I would overhear tense conversations about bills or investments cut short when they noticed my presence. But every family had its struggles, and on the surface, Mark appeared to be living the American dream he had always wanted. I continued on my more modest path, dating occasionally, but never finding a relationship that stuck, focusing on my career advancement, and slowly saving toward my goal of purchasing my own home. If I sometimes felt a twinge of envy at the life Mark had built so quickly, I pushed it aside, reminding myself that we had different priorities and different measures of success. Little did I know that both our lives were about to change dramatically, testing the bonds of family loyalty in ways I could never have anticipated. The economic downturn of 2020 hit many businesses hard, but Mark's real estate ventures seemed particularly vulnerable. His company had expanded rapidly, taking on significant debt to acquire properties that he planned to flip for quick profits. When the market suddenly stalled and interest rates rose, he found himself overextended and underprepared. The call came on a Tuesday evening in April. I had just finished a long day of virtual meetings and was heating up leftover pasta when Mark's name flashed on my phone screen. Celeste. His voice was tight with stress. I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over this weekend? Is everything okay? I asked, immediately concerned by his tone. There was a long pause. No, not really. I'm in trouble, sis. Serious trouble. Unable to wait for the weekend, I drove to his house that night after he admitted the severity of his situation. The perfect suburban home looked the same from the outside, but inside the atmosphere was thick with tension. Jessica was noticeably absent, having taken the children to her mother's house to give us space to talk. Mark sat at his kitchen island, looking more defeated than I had seen him since our parents' death. His normally perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and he hadn't shaved in what looked like days. I'm about to lose everything, he confessed, staring into the untouched whiskey in his glass. The business is basically bankrupt. I've got 3 mortgage payments in arrears. The kids' school is threatening to withdraw them if the tuition isn't paid by next week. Jessica's luxury car was repossessed yesterday. I listened in shock as he detailed the collapse of his financial house of cards. His business had been struggling for longer than anyone knew, but he had kept up appearances by taking out new loans to cover old debts, using personal credit cards to pay business expenses, and depleting any savings they had accumulated. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked, trying to keep accusation from my voice. "I could have helped before it got this bad." "I kept thinking I could turn it around," he explained, his voice breaking. "One big sale, one good quarter, and everything would be fine. I didn't want to worry you. And honestly, I was embarrassed. Everyone thinks I'm so successful, and the truth is, I'm a complete failure." My heart ached for my little brother. Despite our parents' favoritism, despite his sometimes outsized ego, this was the boy who had defended me against bullies, who had held my hand at our parents' funeral when I finally broke down. "How much do you need to keep the house and the kids in school?" I asked. He named a figure that made my stomach drop: $50,000. It was more than half of what I had managed to save toward my down payment fund. "I know it's a lot," Mark said quickly, seeing my expression. "I'll pay you back as soon as things turn around. This is just temporary, Celeste. I promise." I thought about my cozy apartment with the lease renewal coming up, the home I had been saving for, the security I had carefully built. Then I thought about my niece and nephews being pulled from their school mid-semester, losing the home they'd grown up in, facing the instability that comes with financial crisis. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow," I said. "We're family, Mark. We have to look out for each other." The relief and gratitude on his face seemed genuine. He hugged me tightly, tears in his eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without you, sis. You've always been the strong one, the responsible one. I swear I'll make this right." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. And so began my role as the financial support system for Mark and his family. What started as a one-time emergency bailout quickly evolved into regular assistance. After the initial $50,000 kept them afloat for a few months, other emergencies arose. Jessica needed unexpected surgery, and their insurance didn't cover all of it. The property taxes came due, with penalties for late payment. Tyler needed special athletic equipment for a travel team opportunity that could lead to college scholarships. Each time Mark approached me with embarrassment and promises of repayment once things turned around. Each time I dipped into my savings or put expenses on my credit card, telling myself it was temporary. By the 6-month mark, we had established an unspoken arrangement. I would transfer $2,000 to Mark's account on the first of each month, not enough to maintain their previous lifestyle, but sufficient to cover the mortgage and essential expenses. When additional costs arose, he would call with specific requests that I rarely refused. To maintain the support, I made significant changes to my own life. I took on freelance project management work on evenings and weekends, adding 20 hours to my already full work week. I gave up my annual vacation plans, canceled my gym membership, cut my grocery budget to the bare minimum, and stopped putting money into my retirement account. My apartment lease expired, and instead of finding the more spacious place I had planned, I renewed the one-bedroom to avoid moving costs. The down payment fund for my future home dwindled, then disappeared entirely, as Mark's temporary situation stretched into a second year. Despite these sacrifices, I never resented helping my niece and nephews. I adored those children and couldn't bear the thought of them suffering because of adult financial problems. When I visited and saw Emma excitedly show me her art projects, or help Tyler with his science homework, or received one of Zach's enthusiastic hugs, I knew I was doing the right thing. Mark showed his gratitude in non-monetary ways. He would call to check in on me, invite me for family dinners, and always acknowledge that none of their stability would be possible without me. He seemed genuinely committed to rebuilding his business, describing new opportunities and potential deals that were just about to break through. After his initial depression lifted, Mark even began consulting for a commercial real estate firm, though he described the salary as barely covering the basics and insufficient to support his family without my continued help. I noticed he was still reluctant to downsize their lifestyle in significant ways. The children remained in private school. Jessica still got her hair and nails done regularly, and they maintained memberships at the local country club for important networking opportunities. "It's all about appearances in my business," Mark explained when I gently questioned some of these choices. If potential clients or partners think I'm struggling, no one will want to work with me. I have to project success to achieve success. I wasn't convinced by this reasoning, but I wanted to be supportive. Mark was trying in his way, and questioning his every decision would only create tension. Besides, I told myself it wasn't my place to dictate how they spent their money, even if much of that money came from me. As the second year of support stretched into a third, I began to feel the weight of the arrangement more acutely. My own career advancement had stalled as exhaustion from my second job affected my performance. I had developed stress-related insomnia and occasional anxiety attacks. Friends had stopped inviting me to social events I consistently couldn't afford. At 35, I was watching my own life narrow, while continuing to fund the comfortable lifestyle of my brother's family. Still, whenever I considered cutting back on my support, I thought of Tyler, Emma, and Zach. I couldn't be the reason they lost their home or their school. I couldn't be the one to destroy their sense of security. So I kept transferring the money, kept picking up extra projects, kept delaying my own dreams, telling myself that family came first and that Mark would do the same for me if our situations were reversed. I had no way of knowing how wrong I was. Looking back, I can see the warning signs that should have alerted me to trouble in my arrangement with Mark. Little comments and behaviors that seemed insignificant in isolation formed a pattern I was too close to recognize. The first red flag appeared about a year into our arrangement. I had just transferred the monthly $2,000 when Mark called to thank me, mentioning casually that they were planning a weekend getaway to a lakeside resort. I thought money was still tight, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Oh, we got a great deal, Mark explained quickly. And we really need this family time to decompress from all the stress. The kids have been through a lot with all the uncertainty. I swallowed my concerns, not wanting to seem controlling about money I had freely given. But the pattern continued and expanded. Instagram posts showed Jessica with a new designer handbag. Facebook photos revealed their redecorated living room with furniture I recognized from high-end stores. Then came the car. 18 months into our financial arrangement, Mark pulled into my apartment complex, driving a new Audi SUV. Not brand new, he emphasized when he saw my expression, but new to him. And necessary because his old car wasn't projecting the right image to clients. How much is the monthly payment? I asked, directly calculating my own budget constraints in my head. Don't worry about that, he said dismissively. I got a great deal through a client connection. Besides, I need reliable transportation for work. The response left me uneasy, but challenging him further seemed like overstepping. After all, I wasn't his parent or his financial advisor. I was just his sister trying to help during a difficult time. More troubling were the subtle shifts in how Mark and Jessica treated me. In the early days of our arrangement, they had been effusively grateful, always acknowledging my sacrifice and promising it was temporary. As time passed, the gratitude faded into expectation. The monthly transfers were no longer acknowledged. Additional requests came with less explanation and more assumption that I would simply comply. Jessica, once warm and inclusive, began treating me more like a resource than family. When I visited their home, she would casually mention bills that needed paying or expenses coming due, dropping not-so-subtle hints about needing additional funds beyond the monthly amount. Tyler's summer camp deposit is due next week, she would say while pouring coffee. It's $800 this year. He'd be devastated to miss it since all his friends are going. These comments often came with meaningful glances at Mark, who would then approach me privately to make the actual request. It became a choreographed routine that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Even more concerning were the occasional remarks about my lifestyle and choices. Mark would make passing comments about my tiny apartment or question why I hadn't found someone yet. Jessica would express pity that I had to work so much, or suggest that I should treat myself to new clothes or a haircut, apparently oblivious to the fact that my budget constraints were directly related to supporting them. You should come on vacation with us sometime, Celeste, Jessica suggested once. You work too hard. It's not healthy to be so focused on your job. The irony of this statement, coming from someone whose vacations were partially funded by my overwork, was painful, but I smiled and murmured something noncommittal. Tyler, now 15 and increasingly influenced by his parents' attitudes, began showing subtle signs of dismissiveness toward me. Once he had been eager to share his achievements and seek my advice on school projects. Now he would roll his eyes when I asked about his studies or sports, offering minimal responses before returning to his phone. Aunt Celeste doesn't get how things work these days. I overheard him telling Emma once. She's kind of stuck in her own little world. Only Emma and Zach maintained their genuine affection for me. Emma at 12 seemed to observe the family dynamics with unexpected perception. She would often sit with me in the kitchen when I visited, showing me her artwork, or asking thoughtful questions about my job. Zach, still young enough to be unaffected by family politics, greeted me with enthusiastic hugs and constant chatter about his interests. As these patterns developed, I made several attempts to discuss the situation with Mark. I suggested creating a repayment plan, even if it started with small token amounts. I proposed reducing the monthly support gradually to help them adjust to greater self-sufficiency. I offered to help him review their household budget to find areas where they could cut expenses. Mark had a different response for each suggestion. Repayment would have to wait until business picked up. Reducing support would destabilize the kids just as they were feeling secure again. Budget reviews weren't necessary because the problem isn't spending, its income. When I pressed harder, his friendly deflection would turn to defensiveness. "You don't understand what it's like to support a family," he would say. "It's different when you have children depending on you." These conversations always ended the same way, with me backing down to preserve peace with promises of future changes that never materialized, with the fundamental dynamic remaining unchanged. After one particularly frustrating discussion, I called my Aunt Susan, our mother's sister, and the only extended family member with whom I maintained close contact. Susan had always been more attuned to family dynamics than my parents, often noticing when I felt overlooked in Mark's shadow. "I'm worried I'm being taken advantage of," I admitted to her. "But then I feel guilty for even thinking that. They're family. The kids need stability." Susan's response was measured but direct. "Honey, there's a difference between helping someone through a temporary crisis and enabling a permanent lifestyle beyond their means. It sounds like you're doing the latter." Her words stayed with me, awakening doubts I had been suppressing. Was I truly helping Mark's family, or was I enabling them to avoid necessary changes? Was my financial support a bridge to self-sufficiency, or a crutch that prevented them from standing on their own? These questions lingered in my mind, creating a growing unease that something in our arrangement needed to change. But it would take one devastating incident to finally shatter my illusions and force me to confront the painful truth about my place in my brother's life. The evening that changed everything started innocuously enough. Mark had invited me to a family dinner celebrating his and Jessica's 10th wedding anniversary. I spent more than I should have on a pair of crystal champagne flutes for them, wrapping them carefully in silver paper with a heartfelt card. I arrived early at Mark's suburban home to help with preparations. Jessica was upstairs getting ready, so Mark put me to work in the kitchen slicing vegetables for a salad, while he marinated steaks for the grill. The house looked immaculate as always, with fresh flowers on the dining table and new decorative pillows on the living room sofa. If I hadn't known about their financial struggles, nothing in their home would have suggested anything but prosperity. "The new landscaping looks beautiful," I commented, noting the professional stonework and plantings that had replaced their simple garden since my last visit. "Did you do that yourself?" "Had it done last month," Mark replied casually. "The old design was dated and curb appeal matters in this neighborhood." I bit my tongue, calculating how many months of my financial support the landscaping project might have cost. As the evening progressed, more family members arrived. Jessica's parents, her brother and his wife, our Aunt Susan, and her husband, and a couple of close family friends. The atmosphere was festive, with expensive wine flowing freely and platters of gourmet appetizers circulating. Dinner was a lavish affair. Mark grilled perfect steaks, while Jessica served her specialty roasted potatoes and asparagus. The children were on their best behavior, even Tyler making an effort to engage with the adults rather than disappearing into his phone. After the main course, Jessica asked me to help bring out the dessert from the kitchen, a elaborate tiramisu she had ordered from an upscale bakery. As I gathered dessert plates and forks, I heard voices from the adjacent dining room, Mark and Tyler speaking in what they thought were hushed tones. "Dad, why do I need to keep my grades so high for college?" Tyler was asking. "Aunt Celeste makes good money with just a bachelor's degree, and she doesn't work crazy hours like you and Mom always talk about." There was a brief pause before Mark responded, his voice carrying clearly into the kitchen where I stood frozen. "Don't use your aunt as an example," Mark said firmly. "There's no place for losers in this family. She has no husband, no kids, lives in that tiny apartment, and works a dead-end job. Is that what you want for yourself?" I nearly dropped the stack of plates I was holding. The physical sensation was immediate, a cold flush spreading through my body, my heart seeming to drop into my stomach, my hands suddenly clammy. Then came Jessica's uncomfortable laughter, followed by her addition. "Well, at least she's useful for paying our bills." I stood motionless in the kitchen, their words echoing in my ears. Loser, tiny apartment, dead-end job, useful for paying bills. 3 years of support, thousands of dollars, countless sacrifices. And this was how they saw me. This was what they said when they thought I couldn't hear. With mechanical movements, I set down the dessert plates on the counter. The tiramisu sat waiting in its bakery box, but I couldn't bring myself to carry it out. Instead, I quietly walked to the guest room where I had left my purse, collected my things, and headed for the front door. Mark intercepted me in the hallway, his expression changing from festive to confused when he saw me with my purse and keys. "Where are you going?" he asked. "We haven't had dessert yet." "I need to leave," I said, proud of how steady my voice remained despite the turmoil inside me. Why?" He glanced back toward the dining room, then lowered his voice. "Is everything okay?" "No, Mark, everything is not okay," I replied quietly. "I heard what you said to Tyler about me, about there being no place for losers in your family." His face fell, a flash of panic crossing his features before he composed himself. "Celeste, you misunderstood. I was just trying to motivate Tyler to aim higher. You know how teenagers are. They look for any excuse to underachieve." And was I also misunderstanding when Jessica said, "I'm at least useful for paying your bills"? Mark ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. "She didn't mean it like that. It was just a joke." "A joke?" I repeated flatly. "Funny. Come on, sis, don't be so sensitive. You know we appreciate everything you've done for us." I didn't mean it the way it sounded. For the first time in our adult relationship, I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw not the charming, confident man he presented to the world, not the little brother I had protected and supported, but someone I didn't recognize, someone who could accept my sacrifices for years while privately disparaging me to his son. "I think you meant exactly what you said." I told him, a strange calm settling over me. "And it's good that I finally know how you really see me." "Celeste, please." Mark's voice took on the cajoling tone he used when trying to persuade someone to his viewpoint. "Don't do this, not at our anniversary dinner. We can talk about it tomorrow." "There's nothing more to talk about," I said, moving past him toward the door. "The monthly transfers will stop immediately. You should start looking for other arrangements to cover your expenses." His face hardened, the charm dropping away. "You can't just cut us off like that. What about the kids? What about the mortgage? We're depending on you." "You should have thought about that before teaching your son that his aunt is a loser," I replied, opening the front door. "Goodbye, Mark." As I walked to my car, I heard the front door open again behind me. For a moment, I thought Mark had followed me, but it was Emma, her young face concerned. "Aunt Celeste, are you leaving?" "What's wrong?" I managed a smile for my niece, not wanting to burden her with adult conflicts. "I'm just not feeling well, sweetheart. I need to go home and rest." She looked unconvinced but nodded. "Will you still come to my art show next weekend?" The innocent question nearly broke the composure I was desperately maintaining. "I'll try, Emma. I promise to try." As I drove away from the perfect suburban house, with its expensive new landscaping, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. 3 years of financial support ended in a moment by a single overheard conversation. 3 years of sacrificing my own future to ensure my brother's family maintained their comfortable lifestyle, all while being privately dismissed as a loser whose life choices were a cautionary tale. The tears didn't come until I was safely inside my tiny apartment, the crystal champagne flutes still in their silver wrapping on the passenger seat of my car, forgotten in the emotional turmoil of my exit. When they finally came, they were not gentle. I sobbed with the full force of accumulated grief, not just for the betrayal I had experienced that night, but for years of being undervalued first by my parents and now by my brother. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the resentment I had suppressed, the anger I had denied, the hurt I had minimized in the name of family loyalty. And in that acknowledgement, painful as it was, I found the first fragile seed of something unexpected: liberation. The aftermath of my departure from Mark's anniversary dinner was immediate and intense. By the time I arrived home that night, my phone was already filling with messages, first from Mark, then from Jessica, and finally from various family members trying to understand what had happened. Mark's messages cycled through predictable phases. First came denial. "You completely misunderstood what I was saying to Tyler." Then minimizing, "It was just a throwaway comment, not something to blow up a family over." Next came guilt. "After everything we've been through together, I can't believe you'd abandon us like this." Finally, he resorted to outright manipulation. "The kids will be devastated. Is that what you want? To punish innocent children because your feelings got hurt?" I didn't respond to any of his messages that night. Instead, I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic monthly transfer scheduled for the next week. Then I created a spreadsheet documenting every dollar I had provided to Mark's family over the past 3 years. The initial $50,000 loan, the monthly support payments, and all the extra emergency funds for medical bills, school activities, car repairs, and other crises. The total made me physically ill, nearly $120,000. By morning, Jessica had joined the campaign. Her messages were less about emotional manipulation and more focused on practical consequences. "The mortgage is due next week. Are you really going to make us default on our home? And Tyler has a deposit due for his summer sports camp. I suppose I should just tell him he can't go because his aunt is punishing him." I didn't respond to her either, though. Each message was like a knife twist. I loved those children and had never wanted them to suffer because of adult conflicts. But I was beginning to understand that I had been used as a financial safety net for so long that Mark and Jessica saw it as an entitlement rather than the generous gift it was. On the second day after the dinner, Mark escalated by involving other family members. Aunt Susan called her voice careful and measured. "Mark tells me you've had some kind of falling out," she began. "He said you've threatened to cut them off financially without warning." "Did he tell you why?" I asked. "He said there was a misunderstanding about something he said to Tyler, that you took it personally when he was just trying to motivate his son." I took a deep breath. "Aunt Susan, do you know how much money I've given Mark over the past 3 years? He said you helped them through some rough patches." "Over $120,000, I said flatly. "That's how much I've helped. And do you know what I overheard him tell his son? That there's no place for losers in this family, and that I'm a perfect example of what not to be. Single, living in a small apartment, working a dead-end job." Susan was quiet for a moment. "He said that those exact words, and Jessica added that at least I'm useful for paying their bills." "Oh, Celeste." Susan's voice softened with genuine concern. "I had no idea it was like that. Mark told me you've been helping them because you felt responsible for them after your parents died. He said you insisted on supporting them because you make more money and don't have a family to provide for." This new information stunned me. "That's not true. Not any of it. He came to me desperate, saying they were about to lose their house. I offered to help temporarily, but it just never ended." The conversation with Susan revealed that Mark had been constructing a very different narrative about our financial arrangement, painting me as the one who insisted on providing support out of some sense of obligation or guilt, rather than responding to his desperate pleas for help. He had told extended family members that I owed them support because he had taken care of me after our parents died, a complete inversion of reality. As the days passed, Mark's tactics grew more aggressive. He showed up at my workplace one afternoon, creating a scene in the reception area that required security to intervene. He sent a barrage of photos of the children looking sad with captions designed to maximize guilt. He threatened to restrict my access to my niece and nephews if I didn't resume financial support. These escalating behaviors only confirmed what I was slowly coming to accept: The relationship had never been about mutual support or family loyalty. It had been transactional, with my value measured purely in financial terms. After 2 weeks of this campaign, I made the difficult decision to consult a lawyer. I wasn't sure if I had any legal recourse to recover the money I had provided, but I needed professional advice about how to protect myself and potentially establish boundaries through legal means if necessary. The consultation was both discouraging and enlightening. The initial $50,000 could potentially be pursued as a loan if I had any documentation, but the subsequent regular payments would likely be considered gifts unless I had written agreements stating otherwise. The lawyer advised me to gather all financial records, text messages, and emails that might support my position, but was candid about the challenges of recovering funds from family members without clear written agreements. More valuable than the legal advice was the perspective the lawyer offered. "This isn't just about money," she observed after hearing my story. "This is about a pattern of exploitation that's become normalized in your relationship with your brother. Even if you can't recover the funds legally, you can still reclaim your autonomy by establishing firm boundaries moving forward." With her guidance, I drafted a clear, unemotional email to Mark, detailing exactly why I had ended financial support, what would be required for any future relationship between us, and explicitly stating that any further harassment at my workplace would result in legal action. I also requested a written acknowledgement of the total amount provided as loans, with intent to repay, though I had little expectation this would be forthcoming. Mark's response was predictably defensive and evasive. He denied any intent to take advantage of me, insisted that I had misinterpreted his comment to Tyler, and accused me of overreacting. He made vague references to repaying me when possible, but offered no concrete plan or timeline. Most tellingly, he avoided addressing any of the specific incidents I had outlined or taking responsibility for the pattern our relationship had fallen into. What he did provide, however, was a financial statement from his consulting work, apparently intended to demonstrate his inability to manage without my support. When I reviewed it carefully, I discovered something stunning. His annual income was substantially higher than he had represented to me. While not enough to maintain their previous luxury lifestyle, it was certainly sufficient to cover basic expenses if they made reasonable adjustments to their spending habits. This discovery was the final confirmation I needed. The narrative of desperate need had been at best greatly exaggerated, and at worst a deliberate manipulation to access my financial resources. The realization was both painful and freeing. Painful to accept how thoroughly I had been deceived, but freeing to understand that withdrawing support would not actually result in the catastrophic outcomes Mark had threatened. As the weeks passed without my financial input, Mark and Jessica were forced to make the changes they had long avoided. Through family channels, I heard they had withdrawn the children from private school for the upcoming year, put their house on the market in favor of a more affordable property, and Jessica had returned to work full-time. These adjustments, while significant, were far from the devastating collapse Mark had predicted, suggesting they had been capable of self-sufficiency all along, but had preferred using my resources instead. The most difficult aspect of this period was my relationship with my niece and nephews. Mark initially used them as emotional leverage, restricting contact, while simultaneously blaming me for abandoning them. It was a painful contradiction, being accused of abandonment while actively being prevented from seeing the children I loved. Emma, resourceful and perceptive, found ways to maintain contact. She would borrow friends' phones to send me quick messages or have classmates pass along notes. Her updates were my window into the family's adjustment, and her unwavering affection was a balm during the most painful moments of separation. "Dad and Mom argue a lot about money now," she wrote in one message, "but they're figuring things out. Dad got a real job with an office and everything. Mom seems happier now that she's working again." The situation with Mark was far from resolved. But as I created distance from the toxic dynamics of our relationship, I began the difficult process of rebuilding my own life from the ground up, financially, emotionally, and socially. It was time to focus on healing the wounds that had been festering beneath the surface for far longer than I had been willing to acknowledge. In the weeks after severing financial ties with Mark, I experienced what I can only describe as an emotional breakdown. The cumulative stress of years supporting my brother's family, combined with the shocking betrayal and subsequent harassment, finally caught up with me. I found myself struggling to sleep, breaking into tears without warning, and experiencing anxiety attacks that left me gasping for breath. One particularly bad night, after a series of angry voicemails from Jessica blaming me for their financial struggles, I realized I couldn't navigate this transition alone. The next morning, I researched therapists specializing in family trauma and made an appointment with Dr. Larson, a compassionate woman with experience in codependent family relationships. From our first session, Dr. Larson helped me see patterns I had been blind to for years. "What you're describing is a classic exploitation dynamic," she explained gently. "Your brother identified your nurturing tendencies and sense of responsibility qualities that developed from your childhood role as the responsible one, and leveraged them for his benefit." Over weekly sessions, we explored how my childhood in Mark's shadow had created a deep-seated need for approval and recognition that made me vulnerable to manipulation. I had spent years trying to earn the love and appreciation that should have been freely given, first from my parents and later from Mark. "You've been trying to buy love," Dr. Larson observed during one particularly difficult session. "Providing financial support was a way to make yourself indispensable to ensure you had a place in your brother's family." The observation hit me like a physical blow. "But I genuinely wanted to help them," I protested. "I love those kids. I couldn't let them suffer." "Both things can be true," she replied kindly. "You genuinely wanted to help, and you were unconsciously trying to secure love and belonging through your generosity. The problem isn't your generosity. It's that your brother recognized this need in you and exploited it rather than appreciating it." These insights were painful but transformative. I began to recognize how my sense of self-worth had become dangerously tied to my usefulness to others, particularly to Mark's family. The revelation that I was considered a loser, despite all my sacrifice, had shattered that foundation, forcing me to confront the question: who was I beyond my role as the reliable support system for others? With Dr. Larson's guidance, I started the slow process of reclaiming my identity and rebuilding my life. The first step was addressing the financial damage of the past 3 years. I met with a financial advisor who helped me create a structured plan to rebuild my savings, manage the debt I had accumulated, and establish clear financial boundaries going forward. I also focused on reconnecting with my own aspirations and interests, dreams I had set aside while supporting Mark's family. The master's degree I had postponed after our parents' death still called to me. With careful budgeting and a small educational loan, I enrolled in an evening program that would allow me to continue working full-time while pursuing the advanced degree in business analytics I had always wanted. My social circle, which had contracted during the years of financial strain and overwork, needed rebuilding as well. I reached out to former colleagues and friends, began attending networking events in my field, and even joined a hiking group to connect with new people who shared my interests. These interactions were awkward at first. Years of isolation had dulled my social skills, but gradually became more natural and fulfilling. Throughout this period of rebuilding, Mark continued his attempts to reestablish the former dynamic. His approaches evolved from angry demands to plaintive appeals, from threats to nostalgia-laden reminiscences about our childhood closeness. "We're the only immediate family we have left," he would remind me. "We need to stick together." Each message triggered waves of guilt and doubt, but therapy had given me tools to recognize these as manipulation tactics rather than genuine expressions of familial love. With practice, I became better at maintaining boundaries while still acknowledging my genuine care for my niece and nephews. 4 months after the breaking point, I received an unexpected text from Emma, using her friend's phone as usual. "Mom went back to work full-time at a marketing firm. Dad seems stressed but different somehow. Can I call you sometime when they're not home?" We arranged a call when Emma was at a friend's house for a study session. Her voice, slightly deeper than I remembered, filled me with both joy and sadness for the time we'd lost. "Everything's different now," she told me, her perspective remarkably mature for a 12-year-old. We moved to a smaller house last month. I share a room with Zach now, which is annoying sometimes, but it's okay. Tyler had to quit his travel sports team because it was too expensive, but he joined the school team instead. How are you feeling about all the changes? I asked, concerned about the impact on her. It was weird at first, she admitted. But honestly, Mom and Dad seem less stressed about money now that they've stopped trying to pretend everything is fine. Mom's happier now that she's working again. She says she missed using her brain. Emma's insight was startling. Jessica, who had seemed so committed to the appearance of prosperity, was actually happier in a more authentic life. It made me wonder how much of their lifestyle had been driven by Mark's need to project success rather than by what truly made the family happy. Dad told us you stopped helping us because you were being selfish, Emma continued, her voice dropping. But I heard them arguing one night and Mom said they never should have taken so much from you in the first place, that it wasn't fair. This glimpse into their private conversations was both validating and surprising. Jessica, who had been complicit in the exploitation, apparently harbored some recognition of the imbalance in our arrangement. I miss you, Emma said simply. Tyler pretends he doesn't, but I think he does too. Zach asks about you all the time. I miss all of you too, I told her, my voice thick with emotion. The problem was never with you kids. It was an adult situation between me and your parents. I know, she said with that preternatural wisdom some children possess. Can I still text you sometimes? I won't tell if you don't want me to. Of course you can, I assured her. I'll always be here for you, Emma. That hasn't changed. This conversation marked a turning point in my recovery. The knowledge that the children were adjusting to their new circumstances, that Jessica had acknowledged the unfairness of their demands on me, and that Emma still wanted me in her life, all helped ease the burden of guilt I had been carrying. 6 months after the breaking point, I had established a new rhythm to my life. My apartment, once a symbol of my loser status in Mark's eyes, had become a sanctuary I had reclaimed for myself. I redecorated on a modest budget, replacing the functional but impersonal furnishings with items that reflected my own taste and brought me joy. The tiny apartment transformed into a space that was truly mine, filled with books, plants, and art that I had selected purely because I loved them. My career, far from being the dead-end job Mark had dismissed, began to flourish as I applied concepts from my master's program to my work projects. A promotion followed, bringing not just increased income, but greater creative control and professional recognition. Colleagues who had previously seen me as reliable but unremarkable began to recognize my strategic thinking and innovative approaches. Most importantly, I began to develop a chosen family, friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Lisa, a classmate from my master's program, became a particularly close friend who understood the complex dynamics of family obligation. Jordan, my neighbor who had recently moved to Chicago, introduced me to his circle of friends who welcomed me without question. Sarah, a colleague from work, invited me to join her book club, expanding my social circle further. These relationships were different from what I had experienced with Mark's family. They were balanced, reciprocal, and based on genuine appreciation rather than utilitarian value. When Lisa helped me study for a difficult exam, or when I brought soup to Jordan when he was sick, these acts of support weren't tallied or leveraged. They were simply expressions of care flowing naturally between people who valued each other. The contrast highlighted just how unhealthy my relationship with Mark had become. In therapy, I began to address the deeper question that had been haunting me. Could I ever have a relationship with my brother again? And if so, what would that relationship look like? The answer wasn't simple or immediate. It would emerge gradually through the painful but necessary process of establishing my own worth, independent of my usefulness to others, of learning to recognize manipulation tactics before they ensnared me, and of building the capacity to maintain boundaries with compassion but firmness. What became increasingly clear, however, was that I would never again allow my own well-being to be sacrificed on the altar of Mark's needs or desires. Whether our relationship could be salvaged remained an open question, but my newfound self-respect was non-negotiable. The woman who had silently accepted the role of financial support system, while being privately dismissed as a loser, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, clearer about her worth, and unwilling to accept anything less than the respect she deserved. The path to this transformation had been painful beyond measure, but as I continued to rebuild my life piece by piece, I began to recognize the unexpected gift hidden within the betrayal, the opportunity to finally break free from patterns that had constrained me since childhood, and to create a life that was authentically, unapologetically mine. Nearly a year after the fateful dinner at Mark's house, I found myself standing in my Aunt Susan's backyard, a glass of lemonade in hand, watching children run through sprinklers on a warm summer afternoon. Susan had organized a birthday gathering for herself, carefully inviting family members from both sides of the ongoing tension, a neutral ground where various factions could coexist without direct confrontation. I had hesitated to attend knowing Mark and his family would be there, but Susan had been my strongest supporter throughout the ordeal. "You don't have to talk to him," she had assured me, "but don't let his presence rob you of family connections you value." So I came arriving early to help Susan set up and to establish my presence before Mark's family appeared. My aunt greeted me with a warm embrace, whispering, "I'm proud of you," in my ear before introducing me to relatives I hadn't seen in years. I was different now in ways both visible and invisible. My promotion had allowed me to replace my worn wardrobe with clothes that expressed my personal style, rather than just meeting professional requirements. My master's program was nearing completion, giving me a quiet confidence in my intellectual capacity that had been missing before. Most significantly, therapy had helped me develop boundaries that protected my sense of self-worth from external validation or criticism. When Mark's family arrived, I felt the shift in the atmosphere immediately. Conversations paused briefly before resuming with forced cheerfulness. Eyes darted between us, gauging potential drama. Susan squeezed my arm supportively before going to greet them with the same warmth she had shown me. The children spotted me immediately. Zach, now 9, broke away from his parents and ran toward me with unfiltered joy. "Aunt Celeste," he shouted, wrapping his arms around my waist. "I lost 2 teeth. Want to see?" Before I could respond, Emma approached more cautiously, her eyes seeking permission. When I opened my arm to include her, she pressed against my side in a half hug. "I missed you," she whispered. "I got first place in the art show." "I'm so proud of you," I told her sincerely. "I want to hear all about it." Tyler hung back with his parents, his 15-year-old dignity preventing the open affection his siblings displayed. But he raised a hand in acknowledgement, a small smile suggesting he wasn't entirely indifferent to my presence. Mark and Jessica remained across the yard, their body language tense. Jessica busied herself arranging food they had brought on Susan's buffet table. Mark stood awkwardly, a beer in hand, occasionally glancing in my direction, but making no move to approach. For the next hour, I focused on reconnecting with the children and chatting with other relatives, carefully navigating the space to maintain distance from Mark. It was Susan who eventually engineered our encounter, asking us both to help bring more ice from the garage freezer, a transparent ploy to force interaction that I recognized immediately but couldn't gracefully avoid. In the relative privacy of the garage, Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. "You look good," he offered. "I heard you got a promotion." I did. I confirmed, keeping my tone neutral as I scooped ice into a bucket. "How have you been?" "Adjusting," he replied with a rueful smile that reminded me painfully of our childhood. "The new house is smaller but actually works better for us. Jessica's enjoying being back at work full-time. The kids have adapted better than we expected." I nodded, unsure what response he was seeking. The conversation felt surreal after nearly a year of minimal contact, punctuated by increasingly infrequent text messages requesting financial help that I consistently refused. "Listen, Celeste," he said, finally setting down his empty bucket. "I know things ended badly between us. I've been wanting to clear the air." I steeled myself for what might come next. Another manipulation attempt, another minimization of the harm he had caused, another request disguised as reconciliation. "I'm sorry," he said instead, the words seeming to surprise even him. "What I said about you that night was cruel and untrue. You were never a loser. You were always the strong one, the one who held everything together while I just took and took." The simple acknowledgement so long withheld caught me off guard. "Why did you say it then?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair in that familiar nervous gesture. "Because I was jealous, if I'm being honest. You've always had this integrity that I lack. You built your life carefully, responsibly. I took shortcuts, lived beyond my means, prioritized appearances over substance. When my business failed, it was easier to dismiss your life choices as losing than to admit that maybe you had it right all along." His surprising self-awareness left me momentarily speechless. In the silence, he continued, "I don't expect forgiveness. What I did, taking advantage of your generosity for years and then insulting you behind your back, it's probably unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that I recognize what I did. The kids miss you terribly. I miss you too, though I have no right to say that." I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of the manipulation I had become adept at recognizing. But what I saw instead was something new. Humility, perhaps, or at least the beginning of genuine accountability. "I can't go back to how things were," I told him finally. "Not ever. I won't be your financial safety net again." "I wouldn't ask that," he said quickly. "We're managing fine now. Jessica's income plus my corporate job covers our needs. We've learned to live within our means finally." It wasn't just about the money, Mark, I explained, feeling the importance of making this clear. It was about respect, about recognizing my worth beyond what I could provide for you. He nodded slowly. "I understand that now. Or I'm trying to, anyway." He hesitated before adding, "Would it be possible? Not today, not right away. But someday could we try to build some kind of relationship again? Something healthier for the kids, if nothing else." The question hung between us, weighted with complicated history and uncertain future. In therapy, I had prepared for this moment, considering what boundaries would be necessary if Mark ever sought reconciliation. I had promised myself I wouldn't respond from emotion alone, either positive or negative, but would make decisions aligned with my hard-won self-respect. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm open to small steps, maybe occasional family gatherings like this where the kids can see me. But trust takes time to rebuild, Mark, and some kinds of damage can't be completely undone." Relief softened his features at my limited openness. "That's more than I deserve," he acknowledged. "Thank you." We rejoined the party separately, carrying our buckets of ice, as if the conversation hadn't altered the emotional landscape between us. For the remainder of the afternoon, we maintained our distance while I connected with my niece and nephews, learning about their new school's activities and friends. As the gathering wound down, Emma approached me with a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," she said, handing me what appeared to be a carefully drawn portrait. The pencil sketch showed me as she saw me, smiling confident, surrounded by books and what looked like graduation symbols. At the bottom she had written, "The strongest person I know." "It's beautiful, Emma," I said, genuinely moved. "Thank you." "Dad told us what happened," she confided quietly, "about why you stopped coming around. He said mean things about you that weren't true and that he was sorry." Her revelation surprised me. I had assumed Mark would maintain his narrative of my selfishness with the children. "He seems different now," she continued thoughtfully. "Less worried about what other people think. Mom says they're both happier living honestly than pretending to be rich." From the mouths of children comes wisdom adults often struggle to grasp. The facade of success Mark had been so desperate to maintain had been a prison of his own making. The financial constraints they now lived within had paradoxically created a freedom they hadn't experienced before. As I prepared to leave, Tyler approached awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets. "Hey, Aunt Celeste," he mumbled. I'm sorry about before, about how I acted." "You were following your parents' lead," I said gently. "That's what kids do." "Yeah, but still," he kicked at the grass. "I've been thinking about college and stuff. Dad says you're getting another degree." "That's pretty cool." "It is cool," I agreed. "If you ever want to talk about college options or anything else, I'm always happy to listen." He nodded, a tentative smile breaking through his teenage reserve. maybe sometime. That afternoon at Susan's house marked the beginning of a careful, gradual reconnection. Not with Mark directly, but with the children I had missed desperately. We established a monthly tradition where Emma, Tyler, and Zach would visit me for an afternoon without their parents. Sometimes we would go to museums or parks. Other times simply hang out in my apartment baking cookies or playing board games. Mark and Jessica respected this arrangement, never attempting to insert themselves into these visits or use them as leverage to reestablish financial dependence. Whether this restraint stemmed from genuine growth or simply the recognition that I would cut contact again if they overstepped, the result was the same: a healthier dynamic where boundaries were acknowledged and maintained. My own life continued to evolve in positive directions. I completed my master's degree, celebrated with my chosen family of friends who had supported me through the program. My career advancement brought financial security that allowed me to begin looking at small houses in neighborhoods I'd previously considered beyond my reach. I even started dating again, approaching relationships with a clearer sense of my worth and stronger boundaries around acceptable treatment. The pain of Mark's betrayal never completely disappeared, but it transformed from an acute wound to a scar that reminded me of valuable lessons learned. I no longer measured my worth by what I could provide to others. I recognized manipulation tactics quickly and responded with firm boundaries rather than compliance. I understood that true family, whether biological or chosen, is built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and ultimately for others, is to stop supporting patterns that harm everyone involved. Mark's family had not collapsed without my financial support. If anything, they had found a more authentic and sustainable way of living. My refusal to continue enabling their excessive lifestyle had forced necessary changes that ultimately benefited them as well as me. A year and a half after the breaking point, I attended Tyler's high school basketball game, sitting a few rows away from Mark and Jessica. When Tyler scored a difficult basket, Mark turned instinctively to share the moment of pride with me. Our eyes met briefly across the rows of seats, and he gave a small acknowledging nod. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't a return to what we had been before. It was something new, a recognition of shared history and family connection tempered by hard-earned wisdom about what healthy relationships require, a fragile bridge being built across the chasm of past hurt. Not to return to the place we had been, but to potentially create something better on new foundations of honesty, respect, and appropriate boundaries. As I watched my nephew on the court, playing for his public school team rather than the elite private academy he had previously attended, I realized that sometimes what seems like loss is actually liberation. Mark had called me a loser, but in losing the dysfunctional dynamic that had defined our relationship for years, both of us had ultimately won something far more valuable: the chance to build lives based on truth, rather than illusion on earned respect, rather than exploitation on authentic connection, rather than transaction. It was a complicated victory, bittersweet in many ways. But as I sat in those bleachers watching a family I had both separated from and remained connected to in new ways, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not perfect happiness, not complete resolution, but the quiet certainty that I had found my own worth and would never again allow anyone, family or otherwise, to convince me it was measured by what I could give rather than who I truly was. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest part of loving family is knowing when to step back for everyone's well-being. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by what you provide to others, but by the integrity with which you live your own life.